speaking and evaluations. He works as a supervisor, leading the maintenance of several utility solar plants. It is not only his role as a supervisor that promotes him to conduct multiple evaluations and speeches. He realizes that by evaluating Toastmasters and assisting Toastmasters with their own journey makes you a better leader and allows him to be surrounded by very talented, I'm going to tongue-tie there, Carolwoodians. Is that right? Carolwoodians? Tonight, Wesley will share his first speech in the Dynamic Leadership Level 2 path. Please welcome Wesley and his leadership style.
Good evening, fellow Carolwoodians and our distinguished guests, and anyone that has ever decided to herd cats. So, I took on the path of leadership several years ago, and my thoughts getting into leadership was you have a boss that he sits in his office, looks on the stock market all day long while everybody else goes out to work. And then they come back in with their work, and he looks at the work that they did and he says, looks good, and then he puts all the stuff in his bag, and then he goes home. For many years, that's what I saw as the leader that I worked for. But when I became a leader, I realized it's a lot more work than he showed me. What I learned is that it's a lot more involved. It works on a lot of your soft skills. And when I say soft skills, you're talking about you going into an environment that someone comes in, they had a bad morning, they had maybe an argument with their spouse, and that becomes a part of your day. Because now you have to work with that person throughout the day, knowing that their mindset is a little bit distracted. So I did the survey on pathways, and it said that my leadership style, there was not one dominant style, I actually have three. So my first style, it says that I am, and I say it says because I'm talking about the survey. I do agree with what the survey says, but it says my first leadership style is diplomatic. The reason I'm diplomatic is because I have no problem letting someone else lead a situation. So as I progressed as a supervisor, there are several times that I needed to have someone be in charge of my department. Maybe I was off somewhere off-site working, or maybe I was in a meeting throughout the entire day. So I chose several candidates that I wanted to delegate my role to, so when I'm away, they could go ahead and take over the department. My second leadership style is pace setting. The reason I go for pace setting is because I like to have a goal. Before I was leading anyone else, I was leading myself. And the way I motivate myself is I set up a goal and I go for that goal. So that quickly transcended into me being a leader. That's the way I lead. My third leadership role, or leadership style, is actually coaching. With coaching, I look for opportunities where I can improve my leadership with my team. So I said with me, for my team, but actually what's taking place is I look for situations where I may have a technician, for example, that wants to work as a leader in the future. So I look for opportunities where I could develop him as a leader. So like, for example, I had one technician, his name was Scott, and Scott wanted nothing more than he wanted to be a director. But he's never done it before. He's never been a director, he's never been a manager, he's never been a supervisor. So the first opportunity I could get, I started sitting down with Scott trying to find out what he does that would make him qualify as a leader. Scott volunteers in his community. He does a lot of community activities, little barbecues here, little parties there for donations. So he's already been delegating and actually planning events, so he's already showing leadership skills. So I gave Scott an opportunity to lead. And I said, Scott, I need you to just, if something comes up, answer the phone. If you're unsure of what to do, call me. I'll step out of the meeting and I'll take care of it. So the first thing happens is we get an emergency. Scott answers the phone. Well, I wasn't there, so I don't know what the conversation was like. But I came back and Scott was like, hey, guess what? You know, they called and they needed someone to come over here and work, and I grabbed somebody and I sent them over there to work, and then he had to go home. And then it turns out Scott almost tripped the power plant.
Oh boy.
So I was like, Scott, if you weren't sure what you were supposed to do, why didn't you just give me a call? He says, oh, I got it. I did everything exactly like you said. I said, no, Scott. I said, if you're in a situation where it's over your head, call me. He thought, well, it wasn't over my head. I knew what to do. I called the guy, I send him out there to work. That's what bosses do. You call the guy and you send him to work. I said, Scott, you have to analyze the situation. You have to realize that this technician is not qualified for the caliber of work that you're expecting from him. So you have to spend the time, and then I started going through the idea of literally coaching him at that point, telling them, you have to spend the time, learn who you're working with, learn their skill sets, and you have to understand that Scott came in this morning. Well, Scott, coincidence, I should mention, there were two Scotts. So Scott number 2 actually came in that morning. He had some problems at home because he's got a new baby on the way, so his mindset wasn't really at work. So when Scott number 1, which is my step-in supervisor, sent him out there to work, he wasn't really focused on the job that day. That was one of those days where you should have just set him up for training, and that's why I had him in the shop. So when Scott number 1, my backup supervisor, saw Scott sitting in the shop, he said, well, Scott's here, there's work to be done, Scott, you go take care of it. So that was a lesson learned for Scott, but actually that was a lesson learned for me as well.